In this video, we're going to talk about a location called Old Stone Fort, which is a Native American fortification, or at least appears to be a fortification that existed at the time of the Book of Mormon. It's located in central Tennessee, just west of the Manchester, Tennessee area. And I'm going to share the information that we have about it and the sites around it, and talk about what we know from that and what it may, the information it may give us about the Book of Mormon. Done a number of previous videos looking at sites that may relate to the Book of Mormon. Done some videos related to sites that may be cities that existed during the Book of Mormon, and also fortifications that exist that may relate to the Book of Mormon. For the cities, I've put on the little map here the Hopewell Native American sites that fit the Book of Mormon time frame, that archaeologically appear to be cities that would fit the Book of Mormon time frame. I've done videos on a number of these in the past. For example, I've done one on Poverty Point down in northeast Louisiana, one of the Pinson Mounds in western Tennessee. I've done one related to the Chillicothe, Ohio area, the Fort Ancient, Ohio area. I've done one on the Charleston, West Virginia area, the Marietta, Ohio, Ben's Run, West Virginia, Moundsville, West Virginia areas, Portsmouth, Ohio. Sorry, this is Portsmouth, and this was the Chillicothe one, and then Newark, Ohio, and then also the Bluff Point Stoneworks, which is sort of near El Camora. All of these, I think, were locations of cities. I actually still need to do the Newark, Ohio one. Now, I've also done a previous video looking at the fortifications that fit the descriptions given in the Book of Alma and the Book of Mormon related to Moroni's fortifications that were built in that first century BC. And this Google Earth, I put in red all of the fortifications that meet the descriptions of what was described in the Book of Mormon about the fortifications, namely either fortified cities or places of resort with enclosures built, made of digging ditches and walls around them. And there's a number of them. Almost all of them are either in the Ohio area, Northeast Ohio, Western New York area. There are some down the Kanawha River Valley down into West Virginia. There are a couple in Kentucky, in the Kentucky area. Based on the locations of the fortifications, that's why I think that the Ohio area, for me, is the most likely location for the land of Zarahemla, and then maybe the Bountiful area up here. But there is one fortification that meets the descriptions, sort of fits the descriptions of the Moroni type fortifications, the enclosed hilltop defensive type fortification, but it's much further south, and it's in central Tennessee area. It's called the Old Stone Fort location. There's a state park there just west of Manchester, Tennessee. And if we go ahead, since it's Google Earth, we can go ahead and take a look down at it. As you can see, it's in the central Tennessee area. And you have the Manchester, Tennessee area, and then you have the location there. And it's this location right here. And what you had here is that you had the Duck River and Upper Duck River. You have a confluence of the two rivers, and it makes a sort of a peninsula. And you had this area with sort of a relatively flat hilltop area, with on the north edge the river, which makes a bluff all the way around it, and then a ditch on the south side, and then also on the southeast side a ditch as well. And what they did is they built fortifications, a wall all the way around to enclose it. We'll get a little bit closer so you can get a little bit of idea of the terrain there. When you get in too close, unfortunately, the the imaging isn't very good, but you can see the steep ditches and walls that were natural around it that they took advantage of, and then they built a wall going all around it. And then over here on the northeast side was the entrance. Okay, so if you go to Wikipedia just for an overview of the site, you can just Google the Old Stone Fort in Tennessee. And as it'll say here, it's a prehistoric Native American structure. It was originally considered a fort. They'll argue that it's not a fort, and then there was more likely a ceremonial location. And it gives they place the dates as 80 to 550 AD. There's only been carbon dating of some of the artifacts there. Most of those date within the 100 to 3 to 400 AD time frame. And it is, as it says, the most complex hilltop enclosure, which I would call a fortification, this sort of hilltop fortification, which fits the types of hilltop fortifications which were found in the north, in particular the Ohio River area, Ohio Valley, Western New York areas. This is the most complex and largest one that's in the south. And as I showed you on that map, again, it was the furthest south of them. Okay, here is a map in the 1870s that was drawn of it. As you can see, this was what we just saw in the Google Earth. You had the river going across on the north side, which creates, as it says here, a high bluff. And then on the southeast side, you had the river as well, again, making a high bluff. And then on this southwest side, a ditch, as it says, 60 foot deep, 40 to 100 feet wide, also making a bluff. And so you had this natural fortification. Then on top of it, they then built walls around it. It was built of piled stones and then also earth used to fill up the walls. At the time that it's described in the 1800s, they're described as 3 to 6 feet high, 15 or so feet wide, probably wider, probably taller at the beginning, but we don't know for sure. And then up on the northeast is an enclosure. It's an entrance. You had sort of a two entry mounds and sort of parallel walls that enter into the fort. Okay, so it's in the National Register of Historic Places, as it says there. Next, on the river next to it, there's a nice waterfall. Apparently, the waterfall allows plunge pools, so it'd be great for swimming and stuff. And then it talks about the rivers a little bit. The walled area encompasses 50 acres. When it was initially drawn here, they said 54 acres, but it's about 50 acres. And then again, here's a picture of the entrance with two mounds on the side. We'll click through those pictures in just a second. Again, the walls 4 to 6 feet high going around. It was crudely stacked rocks and slabs. The rocks were gathered from the rocky areas along the river and brought up. So it was a significant effort to do that, but they built it with rocks and then they put earth on top. And so now after having built and filled over by earth, they just look like mounds. But if you dig down in, it's rocks in there. Okay, and then it talks a little bit more about the fort. It's just on the inside, it's a nice flat area. There are a couple of gates left open in the wall, either for access or maybe to overlook or whatever. It gives a little bit about the recorded history. Now, some people they'll look up Old Stone Fort. If you look at images, you'll see this and you'll think, oh well, this is like a pretty sophisticated looking wall. But this isn't the prehistoric. This isn't the Native American wall. Because the river has a nice flow on it. There was a mill that was built, and these are walls for a mill that was built. So this is done by European settlers there. That's a wall that exists there. It's not the Native American wall. The Native American wall looks like mounds. Okay, and then a little bit about the building of it. You can see the what the wall looks like. So again, at this point, the wall just looks like a mound. It looks like a long linear mound that goes around the edge of the rim of the site. Now they state that, oh, and here's again the radiocarbon analysis, all dates to within the 30 to 430 AD time frame. So this fits the what we would call a fourth Nephi type location after Christ comes. That's what most of the habitation looks like. I'll give you some information in a bit, which shows that it was actually occupied two separate times. This is the later time. There's evidence of an earlier occupation, at least nearby, uh, that was that may relate to earlier than this. Okay, and then their arguments for why they don't think it was a fort. Now, obviously, it was named Old Stone Fort. The natural defensive setup is obvious with the steep bluffs around it, and the peninsula. It looks a place that's logically easy to defend. The walls built up at the top around it indicate what would likely be for a defensive purpose. But their argument as to why it's not a defensive structure, they say, well, this would have to have been built over a long period of time, whereas defensive structures are normally built quickly in response to a threat. Well, again, this is an assumption that's contrary to the Book of Mormon account, which is the Book of Mormon account is people who would be used to long-term chronic war and so could build up over time in response to future threats. It doesn't have to be something that's done in terms of an immediate threat. They then say the walls are not high enough for defense. They don't see any evidence of a palisade on it. Now, what that's ignoring is that the bluffs around it are what acts as the primary defensive purpose, right? You've got the bluff 40, 60 feet high or whatever it is. The additional wall at the top is inconsequential in terms of the natural fortification. So it was certainly, when you take it together with a natural landscape, certainly high enough to be used for defense. Now, they say no evidence of a palisade being built on top was found. That doesn't mean that there was no palisade, just that no evidence of it has been found. But one thing about this is that the location, while it had trees originally and the rainfall sufficient to support forest, it was actually, when European settlers came, devoid of trees. And there's dispute as to why that happens, but it's a possibility that the location had been essentially deforested. If you have a deforested location, you don't have that wood there available for palisades, perhaps. And it's a 50-acre area, so you would need a lot to dedicate a lot of trees to make a palisade. So that could be a reason, not that they didn't want to have it, but they just didn't have the materials to make it. And then last, they say the area enclosed, that 50 acres, is so large that this would, be defending a much larger area than you need. It would make it harder to defend. Well, what they're doing is they're presupposing a smaller population than the Book of Mormon would indicate. The Book of Mormon would indicate you have a large population, which could then construct it faster than over several centuries, would have long-term war, so you'd have a desire to build it up, and you would have armies large enough that you would want 50 acres to defend them. And then last, they say there aren't many cultural artifacts that are found in the site itself, which indicates that it wasn't like continuously inhabited as a city. Well, what it appears to have been was a place of resort, as described in the Book of Mormon, which is that where the people lived were in the river valleys next to it. There's lots of signs of habitation, several villages up and down the rivers nearby the fort. And what it appears to have been is what was described as a place of resort in the Book of Mormon, where they built a fort up on top of the hill, a defensive fortification that they can go up to if needed for times of defense. So if you apply the assumptions, apply the facts that exist in the Book of Mormon, all of the assumptions that they use for saying that it wasn't a fortification fall away. And really, when you look at it in fresh eyes, It's an obvious fort as it was originally named. All right, so let's take a little bit look at a little bit more information about it. Now, as I said, the the site is along the Duck River, and the Duck River is actually if you just Google and go to Wikipedia on the Duck River, it is the most biologically diverse river in North America, meaning it has the most fish and other kinds of species involved. It has over 150 species of fish, over 50 species of freshwater mussels. So it just kind of shows what an attractive location the river would be and why they would choose that river as a place up and down the river as a place for their habitation and villages. And then this is the part that talks about the lack of wood nearby. So as it says, the Duck River drains through this portion of Middle Tennessee. The location is known as the Barrens because it was a location that even though there's enough rainfall to support a woodland, but when the white settlers came, had been already deforested upon their arrival. And then there's the question as to why that would be. So again, that may be an explanation for why the fort did not have a wooden palisade on top of the walls, but nevertheless would be an effective fortification because of the natural terrain. And again, it talks about the 2,000-year-old structure there at the Old Stone Fort. Okay, there's been a couple of interesting, more in-depth studies on the Old Stone Fort area. This one is an article. Let's go ahead. It's up. This was done as a doctorate thesis for the University of Tennessee by Stephen J. Yurka in 2010. And what he does is he, in particular, studies the Old Stone Fort. He gives a good description of some of the history and facts related to it. And then he also talks about they did some studies to identify locations to maybe excavate and get more information from there. And we'll go ahead and we'll go through some of the things that he's found about the site. So we'll jump here a little bit. So here's a better picture of the entrance to the stone fort. This was that northeastern location where you enter in and you had sort of a parallel walls that go into the fort and then go around the 50-acre area. And right at the entrance, there are two mounds, one on each side, that start these sort of parallel walls that then go around. So this is the eastern gateway. This is a diagram kind of showing that. So this is that eastern gateway sort of looking this southwest direction. You have the two mounds that we just talked about at the entrance. Then you have the parallel walls that come in as a big entrance way. And then you have a diagram, and you can see the terrain and how it makes such a great natural fortification with these limestone bluffs where they use some of the stones to help make the walls. Okay. Now I've highlighted a few things as we go through that I wanted to bring out. He gives some background information, which you're welcome to find. For this particular one, I found just by going to Google Scholar, searching for Old Stone Fort, and this document was one of the academic papers that showed up for it. That was good. Okay, so one of the things that he says is that the Old Stone Fort fits the fortification style, the hilltop enclosure areas that are primarily existing along the Ohio River and in the Scioto Valley within southern Ohio. And so he says that and he again talks about that Ohio area, sort of the core Hopewell area, which I've sort of talked about in the past. It seems sort of in the core area for the Hopewell civilization and culture, which I think were the Nephites. Okay, and then he said one of the interesting things about the Old Stone Fort is, again, it's the only one in the South All of the other of these hilltop fortified enclosures are more north, Ohio River and north of there, the Ohio River area and north of there. And then, um, but it has that same type of hilltop enclosure, but it doesn't have a lot of the same Hopewell exotic materials. And so it's as if it was a Nephite location that was more south, but that did not have the level of prosperity and craftsmanship that they had back up in Ohio. So he says the lack of Hopewell-related exotic material, which is surprising since the old stone fort earthworks are very similar to the classic Ohio Hopewell hilltop mound closures like Fort Ancient and Fort Hill up in the Ohio area. Okay. Now he also describes that in this central Tennessee area, there are a number of villages and along the rivers throughout. So he says, in particular, along the Upper and Middle Duck rivers and the Elk River. The Elk River is southwest of this Manchester, Tennessee area. There's a number of similar sites, and he talks about a McFarland site, which is about a mile downstream of the Old Stone Fort, and he gives some information on some of the things that were excavated at that Native American village that was located there. All right, and then he also talks about a Yearwood site. This is about 30 to 40 miles southwest of the Old Stone Fort area, so still in central Tennessee. And at the Yearwood site, there are artifacts that relate to the Ohio Hopewell. So he says again that Yearwood site, they have these artifacts that kind of show the Hopewell trade network. There are flint blades used from chert that is from the Ohio River Valley. And he describes that this Yearwood site appears to have been a short-term, intensively occupied site, but was only occupied short-term. This is a possibility for a location like the people of Limhi. So imagine the people that came down. If you imagine the Ohio areas, the Zarahemla area is sort of the core Nephite area. It's a people that came down from that Ohio area, short-term, intensively occupied site, and then abandoned, where they have some artifacts similar to what's in the Ohio area to the north, but it's otherwise an anomalous site where the artifacts and culture relate more to the Ohio Hopewell as opposed to the southern Native American Hopewell groups that were at that same time. And he talks about the location as a possible trade network between the southern groups and the northern Hopewell referring to the Ohio River and north areas. Okay, and then again, the Yearwood site described as a brief occupation, unusual artifacts, anomalous appearance within Middle Tennessee. Okay, again, just a possibility is, for example, perhaps the people of Limhi who are Nephites, but in a Lamanite territory for a short period of time. The carbon dates don't quite match up because the people of Limhi would be more about 100 BC or so, maybe 150 BC or so, sort of in that range. I can't remember exactly what the Book of Mormon said. Whereas the radiocarbon dates are more placing this about 100 AD, but radiocarbon dates aren't exact, and a lot of times they do dating based off a projection of cultural things that they see around it. So it's possible that it is the site, despite the carbon dating pointing to a little different date. Okay, and then he talks about the Upper Duck River, about how diversified, abundant resource area, cutting through several regions that provide a variety of resources. We talked a little bit about the abundance of fish and mussels. It goes through locations where you'd have had a variety of resources that were useful for Native Americans. And then he talks a little bit about the food items that they found. The food thing is really interesting because one of the things that they find is that in this Tennessee site, a number of plants and foods that are similar to what were used by by the Hopewell at the Fort Ancient site. I did a separate video on the Fort Ancient site. In it, I talked about some of the um, foods and things that were eaten there. It was an unusual diet. I think it was the Nephite diet. I'll give a little bit more information on that. I pulled up this other source. We'll go a little bit more into up here, a little more into the details of the diet. But he says that it includes hickory nuts, the chenopodium. The chenopods are the goosefoot, which is the cousin of quinoa, the polygonum and phalaris. One of these was the erect knotweed, which is sort of a cousin of buckwheat, sunflower seeds, and this is a kind of a pumpkin or squash. Okay, and then there's a picture of again, the river, and I think that we're good there. So let's go ahead to this other. Okay, so here's this document up there. So this is in the Tennessee Archaeology publication. It's a study by Brian Butler here, and it looks in particular at the plants and food items that were found at that Yearwood site, which again is this Hopewell site that fits to the Book of Mormon time frame, relates to the Ohio Hopewell people. And so as he says here, the site was noteworthy for the presence of numerous remains that have these Hopewell type artifacts. He gives the location that it was on the Elk River across from Fayetteville, Tennessee. In terms of a map, you can see the Old Stone Fort site would be up here just west of Manchester, and then about 40 miles to the southwest would be the site that we're talking here at the Yearwood site by Fayetteville, Tennessee on the Elk River. Okay, and then in taking a look at the Yearwood site, he said there's evidence that it was occupied in two separate components separated in time. First, that he's estimating around 100 AD, although that's based on just the types of artifacts they're seeing. It's not on radiocarbon dates, but it was a short-lived occupation, and then later a larger, more complex occupation from around AD 300 to AD 400. And so what I'm proposing is this could be a site that has an earlier site, perhaps like the people of Limhi, and then later during that fourth Nephi time period, you have people come down and live in that area again. And this site has artifacts from both of those occupations, the first short-term occupation and then the later occupation. Okay, and then again, one of the interesting things about it is that it's a site where he does a good amount of research into the types of food and materials they were using. So it gives us a good insight into, assuming these were Book of Mormon people, which I do think they were, what they were using in terms of foods and products. So he gives the types of wood that they were using, and then more interestingly, the nuts and then the seeds. Okay, so they found storage pits with seeds. And in these storage pits, they ended up sampling and giving a description of what they found. And about over half of the seeds were this goosefoot chenopod, which is a cousin of quinoa. This is a very healthy type of seed, again, similar to quinoa. You can also eat the leaves, sort of like spinach. And this was a main staple of their diet at the time, it appears. And then also quite common, about 25% of the seeds were of this erect knotweed, which is sort of a cousin of buckwheat. And so there's evidence that both of these were domesticated plants that they were using. And then a variety of other things that they found, including persimmons. I've done a thing in the past about how the persimmons were important for Native Americans. They're also important for the ancient Hebrew people as well. And then beans, little barley, maygrass seeds, other kinds of things, plum, elderberry, grapes, and so forth. And so this gives you a little bit of insight into their diet, together with, again, they by a river, which an extremely high variety of fish and mussels. There's also a lot of deer in the area. So what you would have implied from here is that the diet would be a lot of fish, deer, nuts. They had a lot of sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, squash seeds, and then these kinds of fruits. And it gives you an idea of the diet that they had. Again, with the goosefoot, which is the cousin of quinoa, just like near Fort Ancient in Ohio, they found goosefoot. This quinoa was domesticated. It was clearly domesticated because what the seeds that they were finding in the storage pits were thinner shells, larger seeds, more edible, and showed sophisticated domestication, long-term domestication of the crops. They're finding the same thing down here. Again, it was instead of the typical wild form, they were noticeably smoother, and so it showed domestication of these kind of crops. The seeds were cultivated, and and the knotweed itself, which is the cousin of the buckwheat, was also a domesticated crop that they could tell. They could also find that they were saving these. So like some of these cereals would grow in the earlier in the season, some would grow later in the season, and they would find them together, which would imply that they would save and store and then use them together. And then it also talks about the seasonal sweet and sour fruits that they were using, like the persimmons and plums and elderberries and grapes and so forth. And then he also talks about some of the materials seem to have been used perhaps for like making baskets or things like that. So there are some, it's on this next page, giant cane, which appears to could have been used for lining, mats, thatch, basketry, using grass-lined storage pits that they've found. So that's how they're using some of those types of products. There's also some of the materials that they found. They don't know if it was used for potential, not just as food, but medicine or dyes, but they have the potential that they could have been used in that a way as well. And then some of the things like the pumpkin seeds, squash seeds, even though some of those have a bitter taste in the wild, by boiling and soaking them, you can remove the bitter compounds from it. And so anyway, I thought that was from this site, it gives a very interesting information as well on the way that they lived. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop share there. So that gives the information that we have about the Old Stone Fort site and the villages, habitation sites along the rivers near that fortification. I do think that it does relate to the Book of Mormon. And if you have any thoughts or comments on it, I look forward to hearing them. Thanks.